Hey, Adam.
Hey,
Hello.
how's it going?
I realized I'm already struggling to stay awake, so
Oh, so
sure.
maybe not
This
more
will
than
wake
an
me
hour.
up. Maybe this will wake me up.
Maybe we keep it to an hour, or do we go to an hour and 15?
I don't know. We could play it by
Let's
ear.
play it by ear. Let's see
Okay.
what the energy is like.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, Gloria. Hi,
Hello.
Linda. Jessica. Yeah.
Everybody, hi.
Hey,
Uh,
everyone.
we arrived at winter.
Yeah.
The right time.
Yeah,
It's winter.
it is supposed to be.
All right. We'll wait people are still signing in, so we'll wait a couple minutes. Hey, Gabe. All right. Good crew already. Give it another minute. Hey, Joni. Natalie, hey.
Doing. I was madly reading.
Hey, all right.
Myself up here. Sorry. Every time there's an update on the computer, I have to like redo everything. Okay. Anyhow, hi, everybody.
Oh,
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone.
hi,
Hi.
Don. Hi, Mish.
David, thank you for doing this, and I'm sorry this is the first time I'm able to attend. The other evenings I either had work or other meetings scheduled. So I had um, emailed Itamar earlier today to ask if the other sessions were recorded and are available. I had looked on the shul's website, but didn't find them.
I asked him the same thing recently. I don't know what the answer to that because I missed last week, or the last session. But we'll let you know.
Okay,
One of
thank
us.
you.
Okay. How's
The
that?
email I got from Itamar yesterday had links, on the Google Sheets to this and to all the sessions in terms of the writings, if that's what we're
The
talking about.
writings. Yeah.
I actually recall I did watch one of the ones that I missed. He sent me the recording link. So I know it exists. I think that was the second meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
Thank you.
definitely all of them have been recorded, so they're somewhere.
Yeah, he'll send it.
Somewhere.
Spot there.
This is a big group.
I know. This is great.
Yeah.
Actually, I do see the recording button on the top of my Zoom page, so they are somewhere.
We know where I am. Cute.
David, you wanna kick us off?
Mm-mm.
You're muted, David.
No, he's not muted.
Or maybe you didn't join the audio yet?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
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 Okay, all right, that explains why no one was responding to me. Okay, so I don't know what happened. How many folks got a chance to read this? Or parts of it?
Most of it.
Okay, so it's I mean it's not an easy essay, but I think it's an extremely powerful essay. And I was wondering if anyone was puzzled by why we are looking at this essay in the context of thinking about home and exile and diaspora. And if anyone has any reflections to share about whether or not this essay fits in or not.
I think it's pretty self-apparent why this would fit in. I mean, I didn't finish it, so maybe I have a lot of chutzpah to even talk. But I just feel like it's very systematically outlining a dynamic that allows fascism to arise. Is, you know, this kind of balance between security and freedom, and understanding what freedom is, and all of the misapprehensions about those two things, which are, I guess, basically diametrically opposed.
I was
really.
going to say too, because like, why does exile exist? Why does the diaspora exist, right? And it's like, so we could be more free. And what is more free, right, than like, well, according to art, like action, right, and acting on your free will and your ideas. And I would say that like this gathering is an expression of that freedom, and is that freedom put to praxis. Yeah, so I think this is kind of a perfect ending.
I like that.
I think also that the whole thing about creativity was very, very important. And there was also a little strand about home, you know.
Yeah.
Am I reading the right essay?
Yeah, no, you were totally reading the right essay. In fact, I think like I want to jump into a couple. I want a couple passages. She does talk about the arts because she links freedom to performativity. It's something that is performed.
Right.
And so, and it's funny because I feel like the word performative has become an overused word in our vernacular. But it has to do with performance, and it can't just, and when you perform, you're not only performing for yourself, you're performing for and with others. And so, yes, it's something, you know, she takes issue with this, what she thinks is a misconception of freedom, which she traces back at least to Christian sources, of locating freedom inside of interiority, and suggests that there has to be a space in the world for freedom, which is why I think the link, because I think it's what we've been talking about when we talk about home and exile. Does one need a space in the world? What does it mean to have a space in the world? And of course, she links it to freedom, and the ability to act free. So let's, so I think, yeah, Joan, you're absolutely reading the same essay as the rest of us, but it's so rich. I want to just start us off. Did anyone else have any quick reactions or reflections before I pick a few excerpts? Yes, Susan, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering, why is it an either or proposition?
What's the either and the or?
The internal or the external?
I don't think it's an either. I think you're right. I don't think it's an either or. It's about the internal alone is not tantamount to being free. If I'm only if I'm in a jail cell and it's always me, myself, and I,
or in a yoga class or meditation, for example.
I was thinking too, like as a queer person, how it used to be that you could be kind of out to your friends or maybe like internally know who you were, but you couldn't really live as yourself. And so it's like the living your ideals, the like, yeah, the living of your ideals, not just holding them inside of yourself.
I think one point one passage that struck me was sort of a counterpoint to this. It was where she says, I have it here, the man-made world does not become a scene for action and speech as in despotically ruled communities which banish their subjects into the narrowness of the home and thus prevent the rise of a public realm. Freedom has no worldly reality. And that just, I don't know, that jumped off the page to me. And my comment in response to that was like, a woman's place is in the home. And, you know, that's where after World War II, a lot of women, you know, suburban women, it was your place was in the home. Eisenhower and Nixon were all into that. And I thought, okay, does that mean that, you know, obviously there's a deprivation of freedom if that's where you're supposed to be and nowhere else?
Yeah. I mean, in that sense,
Just
no,
my own take.
no, you're right. You picked up, and in that sense, home is used in various ways. It's also used in a somewhat disparaging way by her. As in, you gotta have a home, but to be free, you gotta get out of the house.
Right.
Which
Right.
I think reflects back to this question of interiority versus public forum.
Yeah. So you could be like a woman banished to the home and have a really rich interior life.
But you can do whatever you want at home, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But you're not free,
Right.
or you're not fully free.
You're free interiorly,
Right. Yes.
but not
Yes.
free, not feeling that you can act in a public realm, which
Right.
which is the definition of freedom is action.
Freedom is action.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, maybe we start on page 146, the second full paragraph. So that starts with this freedom which we take for granted. Does someone want to get us started by reading that?
David, can you or someone post it on screen? Can you share?
Is there someone who can do that? I am looking at a hard copy.
Let me see if I can do it.
Jessica seems to have.
Did
Okay.
somebody get it?
Great.
Yeah, this is it. Perfect.
Visible. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll read.
And yeah,
This freedom which we take for granted in all political theory, and which even those who praise tyranny must still take into account, is the very opposite of quote unquote inner freedom, the inner space into which men may escape from external coercion and feel free. This inner feeling remains without outer manifestations and hence is by definition politically irrelevant. Whatever its legitimacy may be, and however eloquently it may have been described in late antiquity, it is historically a late phenomenon, and it was originally the result of an estrangement from the world in which worldly experiences were transformed into experiences within one's own self. The experiences of inner freedom are derivative in that they always presuppose a retreat from the world where freedom was denied into an inwardness to which no other has access. The inward space where the self is sheltered against the world must not be mistaken for the heart or the mind, both of which exist and function only in interrelationship with the world. Not the heart and not the mind, but inwardness as a place of absolute freedom within one's own self was discovered in late antiquity by those who had no place of their own in the world and hence lacked a worldly condition which from early antiquity to almost the middle of the 19th century was unanimously held to be a prerequisite for freedom.
Great. And then let's go to page 148. And if you see in the middle, where it says it's that first full paragraph of the sentence that start right where the cursor was. That yeah, right there. We first become aware. Can you continue?
We first become aware of freedom or its opposite in our intercourse with others, not in the intercourse with ourselves. Before it became an attribute of thought or a quality of the will, freedom was understood to be the free man's status, which enabled him to move, to get away from home, to go out into the world and meet other people in deed and word. This freedom clearly was preceded by liberation. In order to be free, man must have liberated himself from the necessities of life. But the status of freedom did not follow automatically upon the act of liberation. Freedom needed, in addition to mere liberation, the company of other men who were in the same state, and it needed a common public space to meet them, a politically organized world, in other words, into which each of the free men could insert himself by word and deed.
Thank you. So yeah, there's a that's a big piece of what I think she's talking about. And so, well, I'm curious what thoughts people have about this or how people understand it.
Well, it's interesting. The first passage that was read, I was about to cite that as what I responded to, and particularly the notion about to feel free, feel being italicized, like you're not really free. And it struck me as really quite a, no matter how bad your external situation may be, you can retreat into your own inward space, which is pretty contrary to my own concept or knee-jerk reaction to what freedom means. I mean, to take it to its furthest point, you could be in a jail cell and being tortured or being ostracized from society, and you can still feel free internally. And I'm not sure how valuable that freedom really is. And it's the notion of intercourse with others is a different idea entirely. So that's a jump that it made.
Yeah.
I
mean,
took
she
it
is.
as like, oh, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, Kelly. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I took it as like free will is not the same as freedom. Do you know what I mean? So the ability to have your own ideas and desires and internal life is not the same thing as being free. So kind of to Adam's point that you could be imprisoned and still have an internal freedom, but that's problematic as a concept of like that's problematic as a definition of freedom because obviously it's so limited, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And remember, she's I don't, not to just historicize her, but she came from Germany. She was forced to flee Germany with the rise of Hitler. She fled to France. She then eventually made her way to New York. So she was a refugee. She lived through the rise of totalitarianism and the spread of totalitarianism. So she saw, in a sense, she observed the inadequacy of hanging on to this inner conception of freedom alone.
David, when was this written?
What's that?
When was this essay written?
When was it written? I forget. I want to say the 1950s.
Oh, okay, so it was
But I'm not sure.
68.
68.
really?
Okay.
Wow, thank you.
So I forget. I think Human Condition was written in 1958. And this piece, I mean, there's a lot of overlap between this and her book on the human condition. As well as some ideas on her book, maybe she on revolution, maybe it's on revolution. That's 1950, 50. I don't remember anymore.
But I think in addition to just, the example of being in a prison cell, and, people have talked about that. There's accounts of, like, how to hold on to yourself under the worst of conditions. But today, when we have this, this really widespread in the West and in the States, industry of, finding yourself and feeling free inside yourself. And I'm sorry, but, meditating and doing yoga. I do yoga once a week, in between drinking and smoking. So I'm okay. But, there's, you could have a job working in a very, some organization that might be doing good or bad, or I don't know, but whatever it is you do, you can go home and you can cross your legs and put on, and feel free inside yourself. So there's this promotion of this idea, I think, today, that freedom, is inside yourself.
Yeah. And
There
there's a
is
history,
truth to
and it has a tradition, this idea that, like, I could be in shackles, but because my mind is free, I'm free.
Right.
Easier,
there
easier
is-
said
there
than
is-
done. And yeah, it's an idea, but I wouldn't want to try it.
No, for sure.
I was going to say that there is truth to, this inner freedom, but I think she's differentiating between how, how that is different from really experiencing freedom in the world, and that's not freedom. If you're in shackles, your mind might be free, but that doesn't mean that you have the ability to act, unless you break the shackles and run away, or something.
Jessica, would it be possible to give us the view of, so we can see each other, or do you want to keep this on the screen for?
I don't know. I can stop sharing.
Could you stop sharing, and then would it be easy to start sharing again?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Oh, thank you. I just wanted to see everybody.
I just wanted to follow up on this conversation about the inner freedom. Something that she doesn't discuss, but occurred to me, that if you define freedom as this inner freedom, and then you're satisfied that you've achieved freedom because you're always able to retreat inside yourself, whether you're in shackles or in prison, or if you're just, sitting in your apartment doing yoga all the time. That's a direct undermining of the other definition of freedom, which demands action and demands that you be in the world. So to value the one, I think, actually may jeopardize the other.
And she says to think outside of the home, to think outside of, like, the internal and the intimate, and to do what's, like, reasonable and correct, sort of publicly, instead of just retreating to your mind, your internal freedom.
Yeah, I think let's look at bottom of page 153, when she starts to talk about performance. I don't know if that's where she starts, but it's one place where she starts to talk about it. So yeah.
I mean, she goes into this notion of internal freedom when she discusses, pretty interesting, the history of, since antiquity, how freedom was defined. But she has but she has her own opinion about it, and that's what she comes to in the end. Yeah.
But I want to, let's hear a little bit more from her.
Where do you want to start?
Maybe where you, I was going to suggest the very bottom, but I see that you highlighted this paragraph. So maybe we should, let's listen to that paragraph as well, since all acting.
Somebody else might want to read you.
I can read it. Since all acting contains an element of virtuosity, and because virtuosity is the excellence we ascribe to the performing arts, politics has often been defined as an art. This, of course, is not a definition, but a metaphor, and the metaphor becomes completely false if one falls into the common error of regarding the state or government as a work of art, as a kind of collective masterpiece. In the sense of the creative arts, which bring forth something tangible and reify human thought to such an extent that the produced thing possesses an existence of its own, politics is the exact opposite of an art, which incidentally does not mean that it is a science. Political institutions, no matter how well or how badly designed, depend for continued existence upon acting men. Their conservation is achieved by the same means that brought them into being. Independent existence marks the work of art as a product of making. Utter dependence upon further acts to keep it in existence marks the state as a product of action.
Now let's keep going.
Interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, let's keep going. A little couple, one or two more paragraphs.
The point here is not whether the creative artist is free in the process of creation, but that the creative process is not displayed in public and not destined to appear in the world. Hence, the element of freedom certainly present in the creative arts remains hidden. It is not the free creative process which finally appears and matters for the world, but the work of art itself, the end product of the process. The performing arts, on the contrary, have indeed a strong affinity with politics. Performing artists, dancers, play actors, musicians, and the like need an audience to show their virtuosity, just as acting men need the presence of others before whom they can appear. Both need a publicly organized space for their work, and both depend upon others for the performance itself. Such a space of appearances is not to be taken for granted wherever men live together in a community. The Greek polis once was precisely that form of government, which provided men with a space of appearances where they could act, with a kind of theater where freedom could appear. I thought about this too. You have to have an audience if you're going to perform, or someone that looks at your painting if you're painting, to give it meaning. So she, I think she's looking at the public square, basically, in the Greek sense of it, of discourse and stuff like that, and community.
But of course, that public square and place of discourse was only for free men, I guess.
For men and free men, right?
yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Yes.
You couldn't be a slave and just
Everyone
go
else was
full
hidden
court.
away in the home in tyranny
Right.
somewhere.
Slaves
Yeah.
might have been around with, but I don't think they were.
Yeah, there were slaves. Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, their slaves were certainly not free.
No.
And the women who
But,
couldn't appear, and the women who could not appear were not free.
Well,
But
had their own
as
realm
Natalie
of
was saying,
freedom.
there's this idea of a public space where people where people can appear. And
And interestingly, she herself uses the word men, and puts it in a completely paternalistic cast.
It's from the
Maybe
time.
that was
come on,
intentional. Sorry?
I think that was her time and
Yeah,
just
well,
her,
Once
just
against human beings,
yeah.
People.
Yeah,
yeah.
I have a hard time with that.
I'm curious if people think that social media today constitutes a public square or not.
Interesting.
I don't
And
think so.
Yeah, I do. I think it does. I think that it's within certain channels. Like if you're this, then you go to that channel and that's your community. It's an online community in a sense. And it some people call it a bubble where everyone agrees or they have similar beliefs, but that's also true in, public physical communities. So I would say yes, but certainly others were indicating no.
Yeah, I don't think so, because there's a process that doesn't happen. I think she's saying that the other is very important in the exercise of freedom. You need it needs an other person, and without that, there's no context, there's no realm for action. And I think what happens, at least in my experience and I don't have a lot of experience with social media, but I have a lot of experience with listservs, and people think they're communicating, but there's no process of interaction. And I think
Also, like the way social media works is to siphon you sort of algorithmically to ideas that echo your own.
it's an echo
And
chamber. Exactly.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think that it can be a tool for freedom. It can be a tool for organizing in real life. But I think the way that most people experience it is really as more of an echo chamber, and you don't have to engage with the other or voices that you don't agree with or want to hear in the same way that you would in the public square or at a city hall meeting.
And you can hide behind a fake identity. You
Mhm.
don't have to actually reveal, yourself.
Not to mention like bots and like
Yeah.
a good number of the voices you're engaging with not even being people.
Right.
Right. And therefore, more dangerously a tool for tyranny, since it's so easy for those with power and resources to scam the system, essentially.
Yeah.
Um,
There's actually a book that just came out called On Freedom, by the
Timothy
historian
Snyder. Yeah.
Tim Snyder.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's clearly influenced by Arendt, though I think he barely acknowledges it. But he keeps returning to the problem of social media, and how it reminds me in Origins of Totalitarianism. So social media seems to have this documented phenomenon of people are actually more isolated than in previous periods, and more lonely or lonelier, reportedly, than in other epochs. And it reminds me of an Origins of Totalitarianism, where she talks about how isolation and loneliness are the fertile ground for the rise of tyranny and totalitarianism. In addition to what Don was saying about how it can easily be a tool for propaganda and other such things.
Hello, I'm new to this space, so thank you for
Yes.
having on your conversation here. This is such an interesting conversation to me because I'm an urban planner by training and specifically study public space, and it's just been my obsession. I really can't think about it's hard for me to not think about it in such literal terms. And I run into the thing of are we talking about an idealized public space, or are we talking about them as we actually see them? Because this question, if we're gonna go on sticking with the question of public space versus various social media platforms, and even there's a gradation, but I can't help but look around and see oh well, they're arresting artists in Washington Square Park. So how public? When they're arresting artists in Washington Square Park, what sort of public realm do we have? That's a really solid, that's a crazy low baseline
But
to read.
isn't Washington Square Park owned by NYU? It's not public. It's a privately owned space, I believe.
I don't think so. I think
No?
it's public
So,
space.
no, they might like to think they are. I really don't believe.
Yeah, it's around it, but they don't own that space.
But I mean, you can say the same thing over about like, you know, you head over to Tompkins and they're arresting people who are trying to distribute food to people who like live on the street in the area, right? Like, so there's there's a difference to me between like what is the ideal public space versus what lives in our mind as the ideal versus what is the actuality here. And I do think though it's really important to hold on to that idea, and it makes me think about where we were earlier in the conversation too, of what does it mean to have that internal sense of freedom? Because I think where I start to feel resistance is you can have such an internal sense of freedom that can carry you through the hardest of times. And if your body is still in danger, then your sense of freedom is dependent on like you severing that relationship between like your embodied experience as a human being and your feelings in your body and the safety in your body and everything that you're creating in here. And is that freedom? And I guess where it ties back into, there's a bit of a roller coaster happening here, but like where it ties back into the social media thing is like, you know, and I, as someone who's possibly like maybe the youngest person in the room in this conversation, I know my biases here as someone who like grew up with it in a different way, but like to me it's so dependent on like degrees of vulnerability. Like a social media space where someone is curating an image is very different than a social media space where someone is freely sharing their thoughts and opening up a space of discourse in their comment section, right? Like those are two very, very different things that can all exist on the same platform. And I see it similarly as in like physical public space as like, well, what am I willing to share of myself in public space? Am I gonna like approach the person who I don't know who is like wildly different from me, or am I gonna stick with the same people? Like we do that same sort of like self-selecting both in physical and in social media, internet spaces. And so like how vulnerable do I let myself be? And also that says a lot about how vulnerable I'm willing to let other people be in front of me. At least for me personally, like my comfort level with myself is a direct correlate with how comfortable I am with other people's vulnerabilities. And so I guess it's hard for me to say like, is one really more public than the other? Because on one hand, I see like highly policed public space and I'm like, ideally, yes, public, like physical public space is more public because we're actually I'm seeing you face to face. But if we also are policing people, but then we also have highly people on social media who are like highly vulnerable and creating real spaces of community, I think. So like, I think for me, what I'm describing is like, can you in your expression and body and every other like realm of yourself be a vulnerable person and have that be accepted? That was very long-winded. I'm sorry.
Well, I think that's connected to, yeah, I think it's connected to what it means to appear. And the vulnerabilities that you're talking about are still a function of intercourse with others, and maybe it was a distraction to get into this. Does it happen virtually or does it happen physically? But I think I want to turn our attention to another essential piece of this, this freedom idea that Arendt is talking about. And that's the idea of starting something new. Right. So we're talking about action, but we also have to talk about beginning, about natality. So we can't talk about freedom in Arendt's discourse without talking about the new, and the unexpected. And so maybe first let's start just, I got a couple passages I'd like us to get through. The very bottom of page 165.
I'm just sharing because it's easy for me to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jessica.
It's great to have the text up and you're so quick with it.
Okay, so if somebody could read the very last sentence on page 165, or the beginning of the in both, just here, in both instances, the very bottom, starting in both instances.
I'd be happy to read.
Perfect. Thank you,
In
Laura.
both instances, action occurs in two different stages. Its first stage is a beginning by which something new comes into the world. The Greek word apex, I have no idea how to say that, which covers beginning, leading, ruling. That is the outstanding qualities of the free man, bears witness to an experience in which being free and the capacity to begin something new coincided. Freedom, as we would say today, was experienced in spontaneity. The manifold meaning of apexev indicates the following: only those who could begin something new, who were already rulers, i.e. household heads who ruled over slaves and family, and had thus liberated themselves from the necessities of life for enterprises in distant lands or citizenship in the polis. In either case, they no longer ruled, but were rulers among rulers, moving among their peers, whose help they enlisted as leaders in order to begin something new, to start a new enterprise. For only with the help of others could the apexev, the ruler, beginner, and leader, really act, zeparev, carry through whatever he had to do. In Latin, to be free and to begin are also interconnected, though in a different way. Should I go on, or?
I think that's good for now, and then
Yeah.
let's fast forward to to page 168. No, actually let's go to 169. The paragraph, the second paragraph, every act.
Every act, seen from the perspective not of the agent, but of the process in whose framework it occurs and whose automatism it interrupts, is a miracle. That is, something which could not be expected. If it is true that action and beginning are essentially the same, it follows that a capacity for performing miracles must likewise be within the range of human faculties. This sounds stranger than it actually is. It is in the very nature of every new beginning that it breaks into the world as an infinite improbability. And yet it is precisely this infinitely improbable which actually constitutes the very texture of everything we call real. Our whole existence rests, after all, on a chain of miracles, as it were, the coming into being of the earth, the development of organic life on it, the evolution of mankind out of the animal species. For from the viewpoint of the processes in the universe and in nature and their statistically overwhelming probabilities, the coming into being of the earth out of cosmic processes, the formation of organic life out of the inorganic processes, the evolution of man finally out of the processes of organic life, are all infinite improbabilities. They are miracles in everyday language. Should I stop there or go on a bit?
I think that's good for now.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's going on here? What is she saying?
Well, for me, I saw that there was some consistency with this piece. I also circled this. I love that infinite improbability. That when we were talking about home, she says home is her language, the German language that she grew up with, the culture, the stuff around that as a new creation every time someone thinks, talks, writes, or whatever, and contrasts that with the totalitarian regime that's ossified, that is stuck, that's, you know, imposing itself on other people. And so I saw this in that context where this is kind of a theme that she comes at from a bunch of different perspectives, that, you know, creativity and language and things that happen when people do them are miracles when they're, you know, a free expression and unpredictable, I guess. You don't know exactly how something's going to turn out.
I had two impressions of this. First of all, it just seemed to me profoundly atheistic. That there is no prime mover, which she alluded to earlier in the essay too, about causality, but that true freedom is completely doesn't have any cause. And that interested me a lot. And then also, I think building on what you were just saying, Natalie, is this contextualizing this, I think, is really important, especially since we discovered it's written in 1968, right? So
Right.
it was a time when we needed something new. And I think that doing things historically had gotten us into a very, very bad place. And so we needed to do something that was completely fresh and spontaneous. So those are my two thoughts.
I guess I think too about how expanded freedom means more possible ways of being, right? So it's greater language, it's more avenues of expression, it's more ways of showing up in the world. You know what I mean?
You know, she uses the language of miracle, which is a strange choice if you're an atheist.
But it's as if she redefines miracle in a completely secular way, which I thought was really quite wonderful.
Not so secular. It's pretty religious.
Well, yes, it is. When it speaks, it's creation, you know, she speaks of creation.
Oh, but it is secular.
I don't see it as secular, and
Well,
certainly
secular
not
in
as,
as much as it doesn't talk about any kind of, you know, Abrahamic concepts or any kind of, you know, God figures or gods. It's all very apart from that.
I think it's profoundly optimistic, actually, and
Yeah, I think it's great.
maybe it's not. Maybe it's. Sometimes in Judaism, people make a big fuss about the word spiritual. They don't like the word spiritual, and you know, maybe I would call this spiritual because it is so hopeful. And you know, the idea that things that happen automatically. You know, that could be disrupted by someone who's able to be spontaneous and in a profound way could create something new, a new beginning. And you know, given that she was a student of Martin Heidegger, she actually had an affair with Martin Heidegger, who became a Nazi. And, you know, returned to her relationship with Martin Heidegger in some form after the war. So, you know, I think, I don't know, she has a lot of breadth to her concept. And I thought this passage was just the most hopeful thing I'd read in a very long time. Yeah.
It's also, there's another passage we have to read on page 167. But yeah, the language of infinite improbability is such a contrast to, like, you know, scientific determinism. So it doesn't strike one as, to me at least, as being secular. it's almost mystical. But I want to go now. I want us to turn to
It's like quantum physics. It's like string theory. Like you can be everything. You can be a wave and a particle at the same time. Like I think it's actually very, I don't know, that's my perception of science, so too.
Oh, mine too. The word infinite is absolutely a scientific term. Improbability is a mathematical term. I read her reference to miracle as, hey, we're highly unlikely as humans. The next brilliant intervention politically or in terms of enlightenment or creativity or progress or technology or welcoming new people into the public sphere is an act of creativity, which is, we'll be lucky when we get the next one, takes freedom to have it. But she absolutely acknowledges the mystery of the first creation, as all scientists do. Nobody knows how the world began. That's a mystery. That's not the same as a belief in God or a first mover. That's just an unknown fact for all of us sitting here, and everyone in the past also didn't know, even though they speculated. It's profoundly secular.
So or it's just in that space of the mysterious. So
it's also just super brainy and intellectual and tone, really hard to read, I think.
I think she wrote in English, right? Not German.
This one she wrote, not all her stuff, but
because the length of the sentences are.
It feels Germanic.
Okay, yes. You gotta pack everything in, but there is also in there kind of, it's, you know, historical processes something about I don't know what's okay. So there is something about every beginning is like a random act where, and I think that what about the interiority of enabling the beginning to happen? It doesn't just, I mean, for someone to initiate something requires a kind of inner experience of some sort, it seems to me. It's in order to take advantage of the exterior freedom opportunity that exists.
That was that weird passage earlier where she said like the motivation is not the freedom.
No, nothing in itself, one or the other. I think it's the combination is, I guess.
Susan, we need you to read middle of 167 to help complicate things more.
Oh, thank you.
So
starting with what?
Starting with, man does not possess freedom. Page 167.
And okay, I'll look here.
Oh, it's right in the middle, Susan.
Hold on.
Man does not, I got it. Man does not possess freedom as much as he, or better, his coming into the world, is equated with the appearance of freedom in the universe. Man is free because he is a beginning and was so created after the universe had come into existence. I'm not going to try to read the Latin. In the birth of each man, this initial beginning is reaffirmed, because in each instance, something new comes into an already existing world, which will continue to exist after each individual's death. Because he is a beginning, man can begin. To be human and to be free are one and the same. God created man in order to introduce into the world the faculty of beginning, freedom. You want me to continue? Or?
No, that's it. That's it. So how does this square with, yes, Jessica?
Well, I'm thinking now, biblically, and the idea of, the God plants the tree of knowledge in the middle of the garden. He didn't, put it over on the side or something. And, in some interpretations, God actually wants man, humans, okay, Joni, humankind, to taste that, And to have to, if it, to have free will to make choices, because without that, humanity is just another animal. But once you know the difference between, good and evil, say, you have to exercise this faculty of freedom to choose, to make choices and decisions. I think it's a bedrock of Judaism, frankly.
She makes a distinction, though, between free will and action.
Right.
And she's critical of the tradition that treats freedom as free will. She and so wants to move away from this idea of choice as freedom in hearing and choice to freedom in hearing in beginning. And I just now because I recently read this book on freedom, and and among other things, it's like a frontal assault on social media. Because what this guy's concern is that social media it seeks to make us predictable, to predictify humanity, right? Because the goal of the platform is to hook you and keep your eyeballs glued. And the algorithms determining your social media feed, and you're feeding on the food that you're also contributing to for others to feed on, and it's all algorithmically generated with the intention of just, again, keeping us predictable. So I wonder, and I'm only thinking about it now because I just read this book. But when I hear about beginning an infinite improbability, there's something about radical unpredictability and uncertainty, an improbability that seems to be connected to freedom. So it's this intersection of beginning, of the unlikely, the accidental, the miraculous, and action. And I think you're right when you said it's very hopeful, because it's also a reminder that we actually the future is not scripted. So you can think everything is doom and gloom, but improbable miracles occur, and the stuff of history is the stuff in some sense of miracles. It's as she's using the language. It's a profound way of looking at things. And it reminds me of that excerpt we looked at from Eichmann in Jerusalem a few weeks ago, when she talks about that she recalls Anton Schmidt, who was the German who actually saved Jews and didn't turn on Jews, unlike most of his compatriots, and he was eventually killed. And and basically her line is something like, to have just one Anton Schmidt is enough. That one improbable person who saved a handful of lives is enough to make the world habitable. So that's a connection that I'm working out in my head right now.
Well, I'm glad she brings up infants, because I was thinking about their freedom. An infant is free in that it hasn't yet had any kind of programming except for the organic conditions it experienced in the womb, but it doesn't really have any capacity for action, even though it has absolutely the incipient capacity for beginning that she thinks is so powerful. But why does God have to give humans freedoms? Why can't we just claim freedoms for ourselves? And surely animals have a certain degree of freedom as well. One that just seems more limited than ours, and which we probably don't recognize or understand fully. Why does she switch her language? I see how she's in opposition, of course, to totalitarian states who have been suppressing freedoms of all kinds, mental, mental, physical, political. But why is the great grantor of freedom God?
Oh, I didn't, I thought that was St. Augustine who said it was God, not her. In that paragraph.
Ah,
Am I reading that? I think she's just explaining Augustine.
I think you're right. In some sense, she's explaining him. Although, well, I don't yet. There's been commentary subsequently that says actually he didn't say that. That's not like she's using him to say what she thinks. And yeah, but I think you're right, Linda, that she is deploying him to make the point.
There's been some criticism of her linguistic, philosophical, Germanic style. And I want to say that the greatest thing to me that came out of this evening for me is the fact that people who consider themselves to have, starkly different opinions, atheist, secular, religious, God-fearing, a lot of different people are all looking at the same exact text and seeing themselves portrayed perfectly in a way that is inspiring them. And who cares what we call it? But I'll call it what I call it, and you're gonna call it what you call it. But there's something, to me, the hopeful thing. Yeah, there's this beautiful hopeful thing that she's saying about beginnings. That's all great. But the hopeful thing is that this world's all chopped up. And we all hate each other, or think we hate each other, and can't hear each other, don't know each other. And that's very significant to me that out of this text, we listen to the text for a second, and some kind of a different kind of freedom. Like there was that talk at the beginning about the outside and the outside and the inside. And for me, it's like, I'm like, the outside world is kind of where I'm feeling oppressed these days. I'm feeling unfree in the world because of my internal processes. And so we came out together, out into the world for a second, and we found some freedom. That's what I experienced.
I like that. It's a
Well,
beautiful
she
way to end
does,
as well.
yeah.
What were
I
you
was
gonna
going to
say?
say that, there's a passage on the prior page where she actually, the last sentence says, the periods of being free, she's talking about history, have always been relatively short in the history of mankind. So she kind of pigeonholes periods of freedom as they only come up occasionally, I guess.
So could somebody also make the connection to the idea of diaspora? Help me with this. Because is the diaspora, is the thing about the diaspora that we think we're free or looking for freedom or seeking freedom, or because the thing about the social media is that there's no containment, it's limitless. There's no sense of containment. And to me, that's a little bit where it connects to the idea of diaspora. It's like there are no boundaries really. And do we get lost in that? Because with the social media, we're drowning in it. We can't think, we can't breathe, we can't, in my view, that because it's so much of it, it's coming at us all the time. So we don't have the space to be curious, to reach out for knowledge. It just is like there, and it's infinite, and we're drowning in it. And I think that we lose our minds from that, and that's why the totalitarianism exists. So is that what happens in the diaspora?
Well, I don't have any answers, but I don't think it has to. No, I think what what we need to create spaces such as this one, although even if in its virtual limitation, um, um, for interaction, for us in Arendtian terms, to appear, to communicate, to act in solidarity, in concert. That's one of the terms she uses. And it's in those spaces that we can be free. And there's something about home that I associate with common space. So the fact of being in diaspora maybe just underscores the need to create common spaces where we can be free.
Like the
But
new,
I,
yeah.
What's that? And maybe and the other, the flip side of that as well is that it's not, you're not automatically free if you're in the homeland.
Uh, First of all, I've been listening on the side to you, Chevrutah, because I've been running around and doing things and coming back, and I'm cooking, and I can't think of a better thing to listen to while you're cooking than what are you talking about? Usually go, oh God, I have to do this, and finish, maybe I turn on the news or whatever, and instead I'm listening to all of you. What delight. Thank you so much. But permit me, even because I listened, to point out two things that I think are important about the outside world. And when she talks about the miracle happens when you encounter somebody in the outside world. It's a miracle to encounter another person outside of your home. That is the diaspora. The diaspora is that our greatest encounters don't happen in your inner space or your home. They happen outside, in the unpredictable, in the chance encounter with people. Now, in order to perceive this miracle, which we know need now to fight tyranny, you yourself have to leave your place as a person who abandons themselves to the freedom to encounter others. And this is easier said than done, because in every encounter we carry the prejudice of millenniums. And we have to be ready to be aware of that, of our prejudice, in order to transform it into a miracle. And being German and all of that, Hannah Arendt, but she was also a pretty wild woman, I think. Hard. Anyway, I wanted to just say.
I love it. I think that's it right there, Susan. That's
Be wild.
It was
But
perfect.
diaspora is an opportunity.
Or maybe another connection is that diaspora is a beginning. For whatever reason anyone leaves his or her homeland, that's a setting out, and that's a beginning, that's an act of creation. And then when you land in the new land, what you bring is an invention or a gift to the people and the place you arrive.
Yeah.
Well, her
Yeah.
last sentence says something to that point. It says, when men wish to be sovereign as individuals or organized groups, they must submit to the oppression of the will, be this the individual will with which I force myself or the general will of an organized group. If men wish to be free, it is precisely sovereignty that they must renounce, which I thought was a pretty deep statement on her part. But yeah.
Yeah, that is a great statement. It's also, yeah, no, she's taking on a lot here.
Yeah.
Because it's also, it's a direct attack on a whole political tradition of sovereignty,
Mhm.
and what sovereignty is, and she's completely turning it upside down and reinventing it in a creative way.
It's brilliant.
And
It's
the end,
brilliant.
the end of section 2 too, I
Can-
think reinforces that, where she talks about courage. I found that linked a lot to what Martin was just saying about getting, it takes guts to leave the safety of your own home, to put yourself out there.
It does. It does. I love what Martin just said. He disappeared.
Yeah.
But let him know we appreciate it, Jessica. Maybe we should end just the last couple of sentences. They're very long sentences of what is freedom.
David, can I throw something real quick on the
Please,
sovereign?
Gabe.
Because I found that what you just said, Natalie, the most impactful part of this essay for me, and I feel like I felt a strong link with diaspora there, because what she's saying is that, you know, you must renounce sovereignty to really experience freedom. And I think that the opponents of diasporism would say you have to have sovereignty to be free, right? You can't really be truly Jewish unless you are in a Jewish state, that everything else is sort of like a second tier level of freedom. And she's saying the exact opposite, that the pursuit of sovereignty is the reverse of the pursuit of freedom, that to be in diaspora is the ability to be free because you're saying, I don't need to be so, I don't need to control everything about the world in which I live in order to be free. And that felt very empowering in that way, that, you know, that we get to say, okay, you know, I'm trying to remember who it was. He's not here today, but he was here last time, who was talking about how his parents brought him and he arrived in the Bronx, you know, after the Holocaust. And like, I think a lot of our families came in the same, you know, at some point in history in this way, the recent or before, and into a world where they didn't control everything, where they had to be Jewish in a place that people weren't all Jewish, that the rules were unfamiliar, the customs were weird, and that you could actually, from the renouncing of the need to control the entire world in which you live, to actually be free. And so that to me linked very, very closely to the idea of home, and a home in diaspora as a necessity for freedom.
And I don't know, that there was that passage I found a while ago when we first started this adventure, that she says, Hannah Arendt says, Jews have survived for millennia, and through wars, through thick and thin, and there's something else going on there that's not necessarily the state or a sovereign entity. And it was very positive and uplifting. I have to put my fingers on it, but not right now. So yeah.
But this, just to come back to Gabe, your point quickly is, and I think you're right. It's sovereignty traditionally has meant in history of political thought, it's meant supreme authority, ultimate dominion, the ultimate final instance of power, inviolability, indivisibility. And what she says is it's actually about communication, acting in concert, cooperation, beginning. It's dispersed. So it's a quite radical move. And I think because Joni, I know you don't like the default use of man for human being.
I'm not
She's
religious about it.
But no, what I was going to say is she's a woman writing in a field where there are no other women writing at the time, really.
Oh yeah, I mean, she's a giant.
She's a giant, and so she uses people like Augustine and others to channel some of her own thinking, because it was so brazen in a sense. I want to, so I know we're 14 minutes past, and I think we said we were going to end by 10:15. So maybe we can just hear like the last couple sentences of what is freedom and call it a night. Who wants to? Thank you for the screen again, Jessica.
Yeah.
And maybe you can read it, Jessica.
Okay. So
starting on 171, where you have it highlighted.
The decisive difference between the infinite improbabilities on which the reality of our earthly life rests and the miraculous character inherent in those events, which establish historical reality, is that in the realm of human affairs, we know the author of the miracles. It is humans who perform them. Humans who, because they have received the twofold gift of freedom and action, can establish a reality of their own.
That seems like an apt way to end the session. And I like that as well as a response to this question of diaspora, Susan. With the gift of freedom and action, we can establish a reality of our own.
Yeah.
That's a double-edged sword too, of course.
Yes. Yes.
Well,
Not
I'll say
everybody wants-
this. I would like to say that about human affairs, we're talking about, you know, the other half of the population. And although I know she was writing from her time, I understand all that. And, you know, but what I'm saying is there was no point, there was very little of the feminine viewpoint in all of this prehistory. And we were sorely lacking for it. And this is the voice of an epic, gigantic woman who had so much to say. And she was a woman, you know. I mean, there are women who I don't respect that much, but she was just an incredible innovative thinker, you know. She put it all together, you know. She talked about a collective point of view, you know, not just, you know, the police and and dictatorships or fascism, but also coming together as community and moving forward in that way. She was really, really forward thinking. So that's a little piece of the
in word and deed.
Yeah.
Can I just say thank you to Natalie and David for taking us on this quest. Thank you, David.
You're
Thank you for leading these evenings so masterfully.
Thank you to all of you, because it
Yeah.
couldn't happen without all of you. So everyone is to be thanked.
Let's do it again in another form.
Amen.
Yep.
All right. Have a good holiday of miracles, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes,
Real
we're
pleasure.
approaching.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Y'all.
Not at all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Ciao.